afternoon. I will talk about the strategies that the Non-Living Institute has adopted in the last 20 years for its growth and its sustainability. Just a little bit of background. The Non-Living Institute has started as a state industry university cooperative research center back in 1991. We graduated from the NSF in 1998. And today I'm happy to report that the Institute has grown to be a university-wide institute that reports to the Office of Research and Innovation. We have a number of colleges and colleagues in other universities that we collaborate with, and NWI works with the faculty in various colleges and partner universities, as well as member companies, to support the industrial sectors that we possess. And one of the biggest things that we do is train future leaders for sustaining our industry and more. The participants are essentially fiber and polymer science, engineering and sciences, with chemical and mechanical engineering being probably the most dominant. In terms of university funding that comes from industry, the numbers are not great. If you look at the industry from the NSF report back in 2018, it spends about $375 billion on research and development. And so part of our strategy has been to really determine, as we are a industry-driven institute, to really understand how industry operates and how industry spends that money. Most of the university fundings come essentially from the federal government, and the industry funding continues to be the lowest component of what we do. And I just recently published an article on this actually in the Journal of Industry and Higher Education. If you look at it as a percentage of the total amount of funding, these are sort of the top 9, 10 universities in the nation back in 2018. NC State, 14.5%, so we're in the top 6 or 7. But if you look at the numbers, the percentage is still fairly small. And one might ask, why do we need to work with industry? Well, there are many reasons, and there are many reports that highlight the advantages of actually working with industry and expanding a research base beyond the classical federal agencies. Expanded research possibilities is certainly one. The benefits that come to the university in terms of access to ideas, new equipment, in terms of enhanced productivity, the type of education that we provide to students, and also the prospects for graduate students in terms of jobs. I think there are many, many university benefits. Industry benefits, of course, collaboration stimulates and improves the R&D programs within the companies that we work with. They can provide a competitive edge to the company. They can accelerate the time to market from ideas that come about, and ultimately economic growth. If you look at industrial relationships, fund research, fund economic growth locally, nationally, globally. New spin-offs lead to job creation, and ultimately that leads to wealth generation. This is really going back to 1990s and looking at all of the different fundings that have classically been supplied to universities. If you look at the federal agencies, it is on the decline compared to the early 90s, but nonetheless, they represent the bulk of the funding for universities. The state and local funding is on the decline, and that continues to be the case. Universities are actually spending more money on research internally, and a lot of that is due to matches that are required by various agencies. But if you look at the industry, while our percentages are high, relatively speaking, amongst some of the other leading universities, the total number is still very low. And then, of course, there's other sources of funding that we look at. But if you look at this, the industry funding today as a percentage is less than it was back in 1991. Of course, we have been looking at how to be strategic in terms of approaching big differences in terms of type of research and type of funding. You can definitely talk about the strategies that the Women's Institute has adopted in the last 20 years to improve and
Ooh, look, Elizabeth, your nails are pretty.
a little bit of background. The Women's Institute was started as a state industry university cooperative research center back in 1991. We graduated from the NSF in 1998. And today I'm happy to report that the Institute has grown to be a university-wide institute that reports to the Office of Research and Innovation. We have a number of colleges and colleagues in other universities that we collaborate with, and NWI works with the faculty in various colleges and partner universities, as well as member companies, to support the industrial sectors that we possess. And one of the biggest things that we do is train future leaders on sustaining our industry. The participants are usually science, engineering, sciences, chemical and mechanical engineering being probably the most dominant. In terms of university funding that comes from industry, the numbers are not great. If you look at the industry from the NSF report back in 2018, it spends about $375 billion on research and development. So part of our strategy has been to really determine, as we are a industry-driven institute, to really understand how industry operates and how industry spends that money. Most of the university fundings come essentially from the federal government, and the industry funding continues to be the lowest component of what we do. I just recently published an article on this, actually, in the Journal of Industry and Higher Education. If you look at it as a percentage of the total amount of funding, these are sort of the top 9, 10 universities in the nation back in 2018. NC State, 4.5%, so we're in the top 6 or 7. But if you look at the numbers, the percentage is still fairly small. And one might ask, why do we need to work with industry? Well, there are many reasons, and there are many reports that highlight the advantages of actually working with industry and expanding a research base beyond the classical federal agencies. Expanded research possibilities is certainly one. The benefits that come to the university in terms of access to ideas, new equipment, in terms of enhanced productivity, the type of education that we provide to students, and ultimately the prospects for graduate students in terms of jobs. I think there are many university benefits. Industry benefits, cross collaboration stimulates and improves the R&D programs within the companies that we work with. They can provide a competitive edge to the company. They can accelerate the time to market from ideas that come about, and ultimately economic growth. If you look at industrial relationships, fund research, fund economic growth locally, nationally, globally. New spin-offs lead to job creation, and ultimately that leads to wealth generation. This is really going back to the 1990s, and I'm looking at all of the different fundings that have classically been supplied to universities. If you look at the federal agencies, it is on the decline compared to the early 90s, but nonetheless, they represent the bulk of the funding for universities. The state and local funding is on the decline, and that continues to be the case. Universities are actually spending more money on research internally, and a lot of that is due to matches that are required by various agencies. But if you look at industry, while our percentages are high, relatively speaking, amongst some of the other leading universities, the total number is still very low. And then, of course, there's other sources of funding that we look at. But if you look at this, the industry funding today as a percentage is less than it was back in 1991. And of course, we have been looking at how we can be strategic in terms of approaching industry funding. And so in terms of the differences that one sees between university, classical funding that comes from the federal government versus industry and national labs, there are big differences in terms of the type of research and the type of activities that we're engaging in. If you look at universities, we're not mission-oriented. As faculty members, we work on interesting, challenging problems. We often don't really have a specific, tangible goal. We're creating know-how, we're creating knowledge, and some people call this curiosity-driven research. So a lot of that is still dominant in many universities. We only work as teams, often when we go after large centers, such as engineering research centers, science and technology centers, and other activities that require an interdisciplinary team. And most often, the teams are not interdisciplinary, again, unless they're required by the funding agency. While when you look at the industry and national labs, they're mission-oriented. They always work as teams that are focused on solutions that help them achieve specific targets, goals, product outcomes. If we look at the Mars mission statement by NASA, they have a mission to go to Mars by a certain date. And every research program really is focused on solving a bit of the problem that enables them to do that. So that's really what I call the mission-oriented. Teams work on scientific knowledge gaps, of course, to enable that product innovation as well. But again, these are focused on a specific challenges, grand challenges, or problems that they're trying to solve. And oftentimes, the teams are always interdisciplinary. So if you look at the type of activities, whether you're dealing with the federal government or other agencies, there's a thing called technology or manufacturing readiness level that sort of takes the research and breaks it up into various buckets. If you look at TRL 1, 2, and 3, this is where we go from basic research to proof of concept. And this is really where you're creating an innovation pipeline. This is where new ideas happen. This is where you create something new, a new formula, a new something that would ultimately potentially lead to a new product. If you look at most universities, we really fall in that domain, and especially most of the federal funding would fall in that domain. Industry, however, does it all. They do TRL 1, 2, 3, and then they also look at emerging technologies, looking at, for example, testing components and processes, testing systems, developing prototypes, and then system integration, where we can do pilot demonstration and then demonstrate this in a commercial system and ultimately commercialize. So if you look at the breadth of the type of activity is much wider than what we typically would get engaged in normally in universities. And of course, if you look at the TRL 1, 2, 3, knowledge creation, basic research, not really mission-oriented, whereas industry would be mission-oriented. The TRL 4 or 5 requires large-scale pilot facilities. We need to have knowledge of prototyping, how to manage these type of large systems. And many universities have capabilities that are not really suitable for this type of activity. And then when you look at the TRL 7, where you go into pilot demonstration and commercial system development, you need, again, large-scale systems to be able to demonstrate the concepts. You need to understand the markets and how commercial development is done. And really, most universities don't work in this domain. So we see a difference in terms of what industry wants, what industry does, what industry needs, and what we classically have done as universities. If you break down the funding that I spoke of, which was $375 billion by industry, into those categories, it's really interesting because you notice that there's about $25 billion that goes into TRL 1, 2, 3, and then $61 billion in the next phase, and then the bulk of the funding is actually in the development side, where we take that know-how and those things that have been demonstrated and taken to market. What that has led to is also a shift in industry funding. So downsides, you have corporate research, and that really means in the area of TRL 1, 2, 3, maybe 4, 5, 6, there is greater opportunity, greater need from industry perspective to collaborate with universities. But also the shift from the corporate to divisional level type of research basically means that we have a shorter time period to deal with the solutions that we have to come up with, and that there's greater emphasis on TRL 428. And again, remember that this is the area that most universities are not equipped to deal with. And so the challenge that we have is we're not equipped to deal with these activities, and part of what we did was we wanted to sort of realign ourselves with where the industry is and where the industry is going to be able to sustain the Non-Moving Institute. And so the key is aligning with the industry would potentially lead to industry funding and industry partnership. And so we are capitalizing on these trends. And this is a summary of what we have essentially done. In TRL 123, we've created a community through consortia, so we continue to do that. That provides access to expertise. We develop know-how, knowledge. We develop game changers. We find solutions to grand challenges. These are longer-term research programs. We don't necessarily focus on IP generation, and they're perfect for training PhD students in a university setting. TRL 4-6 requires the right kind of large-scale pilot facilities and analytical capabilities. You, of course, have to develop models for facility use, understand how to manage these facilities, build a firewall to ensure confidentiality, develop understanding and knowledge of how to create systems, develop IP models that are flexible and industry-friendly, and oftentimes recall that I said these are shorter term, not suitable for PhD training. And of course, TRL 7-9, it requires larger scale facilities again, and of course, understanding commercial development and establishing an incubator to help bring these things to market and cross that valley of death would be critical. So this was sort of the strategic roadmap that we created back in '98. And we said, well, we're going to do it one step at a time. And so we started focusing on learning how to manage consortia. And we had lost essentially a number of our members after the NSF funding expired. And so we had to essentially take a step back and really become more focused in terms of what the grand challenges are, understand the customer, and then really try and develop a value proposition in terms of why would anybody join the consortium. Develop processes, make sure that we lead the consortium with best practices, learn from best practices, learn to lose control, build a community in the sense that get consensus from all the stakeholders, and then most importantly, get faculty in the various disciplines that we are engaging, engaged very early on, because without their participation, you're not going to have a consortium. The other challenge that we all face in universities is ensuring that the units that are involved and the stakeholders that are involved directly and indirectly are not in competition, or we're not in competition with them, because that would be a losing proposition. And then ultimately, we need to ensure that the goals of the consortium are aligned with the university mission. The next step was to build facilities, and we've built a large number of facilities, and this is the last one that we built, and it's an investment of over $20 million, all enabled by funding from industry with the support of NC State and partners, of course. So today, if you fast forward, we essentially have created that pillar for knowledge creation, where we essentially depend on that TRL 123 type of activity, basic research, in various areas. This is purely funded by membership dues from industry. We take that know-how and create a pillar for workforce development, where we do a lot of these both online and in person. And this is primarily funded by the course fees and the lab fees that we would charge for the use of these facilities. Test beds, these large pilot scale facilities are available to members. And so we have a daily rate. We help them reduce their ideas to practice. And that allows us to be able to maintain and sustain these activities. The product innovation is where we engage now companies in the TRL 4, 5, 6, 7. We take that know-how and the capabilities that we have, and we actually help create IP, and we help create new products and help with the commercialization aspects as well. Purely funded by sponsored research through the university. And then last but not least, we formed an incubator in the form of a nonprofit company that really then helps take that TRL-4/7 to TRL-8/9, because this way, if there is market acceptance, the commercialization would be facilitated and managed more easily. So the net result is that on the left, you see the number of member companies before the National Science Foundation expired and after. And so we actually continue to grow. Now, what's really also interesting is that our industry is dominated. So 98% of the industry is dominated by about 40 or 50 companies. And we essentially have most of these large-scale companies, both from the US and Europe, at the table. So we don't expect to see a major sharp increase in membership increase because of the limited number of companies that are available in our industry. If you look at the portfolio for funding, so today the membership dues essentially represent something around 25% of our funding, and all of that goes to support the students, as I mentioned. You have a little bit of gifts here and there, and then services, and of course, sponsored research. So we have a very good portfolio, if you will, in terms of managing our funding. And we're not necessarily dependent on just membership dues anymore. State funding is now down to 2%. When we started this back in '98, state funding represented 50% of our total funding, and today it represents only 2%. And this is just a historical perspective of the growth as a function of establishing all of these various pillars. Knowledge creation, of course, is what we started with. Established workforce development and then test beds. And you notice that establishing LINK was actually a really great thing that we did because it just got us so much closer to that industry commercialization. So today, these are the member companies, full members of large companies, but the key is that they represent really the entire supply chain. And we are global, primarily US and Europe, with the scattering of companies from the rest of the world, but primarily dominated by US and then Europe. We also have affiliate members, small companies, we have startups, and then we have support organizations that we collaborate with. Again, all of the membership dues go to support our graduate student mission. I might add that in the last 20 years, we have placed over 250 PhDs in industry, and today they represent some very critical leading positions in the industries that we serve. Working with industry is not an easy proposition. We need to have the culture change, we need policy change at the university system level. But if we do, the rewards certainly far outweigh the challenges. Again, it provides opportunities for us to learn, to have an outlet for our students to have phenomenal jobs in this growing industry. And it also just makes us all a wiser group of people working together. However, this requires that we embrace interdisciplinary, because by its nature, if you work with industry, we need to be interdisciplinary, and we need to support, of course, the strong disciplines that would feed those interdisciplinary programs. So there was a report recently by the federal government, and it was really interesting because the heading was interdisciplinary is here to stay. And so, of course, again, I emphasize we also need strong disciplines. And of course, the National Academies has talked about this. They had a series of workshops, and they looked at essentially the future and the future generation of scientists that they need to be trained and educated in more of an interdisciplinary nature. Research, of course, continues to evolve beyond the boundaries of a single discipline, and so we need to provide depth of knowledge as well as breadth of knowledge, integration, synthesis, and into an array of skills that we provide to our students. So a greater emphasis on interdisciplinary research and training would be consistent with all of these findings. And so I think you're going to see more of this as we move forward. And then we need change, of course. We need to strengthen the policies. We need to look at the practices, remove barriers to being able to work across the table with different disciplines. We need to have innovative policies that reward everyone. We need to facilitate the research. And then we need to really look at the performance of these and compare them with industrial and national laboratories because they've been doing this for a long time. We should support interdisciplinary education and training. And of course, we should also examine our policies and reward the structures and business practices to ensure that we're facilitating that interdisciplinary research program. With that, I want to stop and thank you and hope that we can connect and develop together. Thank you.
Hey, great. Well, good afternoon. It is really my great pleasure to give you a high-level summary of our ASSIST Center, which stands for Advanced Self-Powered Systems of Integrated Sensors and Technologies. And I would like to share with you today about how ASSIST is catalyzing collaboration, innovation, and impact. ASSIST is a center funded by National Science Foundation, and it is a partnership between 8 different universities that you see down here, and NC State is the lead university. The vision of the ASSIST Center is to create self-powered sensing, computing, and communication systems that enable data-driven insights for a smart and healthy world. And the way we are doing this is by building technologies that are self-powered. They have multiple sensing modalities in them, including physiological, health monitoring, biochemical monitoring, and even environmental sensors. These devices are wearable, they're wireless and comfortable, and they produce continuous and informative data that can be analyzed. Our mission is to really develop these leading edge systems for high value applications in healthcare and IoT. We're doing this through advances in energy harvesting, low power electronics and sensors with a special focus on usability and actionable data. And I'd also like to mention that we're doing this in an inclusive ecosystem that encourages innovation with a focus on education and outreach. ASSIST's capabilities and cutting-edge research is leading to always-on systems. Always-on systems enable continuous health monitoring for chronic disease management, which now has special interest when it comes to the situation of COVID. ASSIST always-on devices will provide multimodal sensing of physiological, biochemical, and environmental targets. With all of this data coming out, new digital biomarkers can be generated. Like I said, they provide continuous operation leading to long-term analysis. And all of this data can explain, influence, and predict health outcomes. And at the end of the day, allow us to gain fundamental insight into disease origin. And just one more slide on our technical focus. We are really obtaining this condition of always on by following this equation, where the power generated by autonomous sources is greater than the power that's consumed by the electronics and the sensors in these wearable systems. This will allow the device to always remain on. And the way we get the power generated to be more than power consumed is by building cutting-edge energy harvesting devices that harvest body power, including body heat and body motion. And on the right side of the equation, we are really lowering down the electronics power consumption and the sensors power consumption so that very little of power is consumed. We're also integrating all of these technologies into wearable systems that are adopted by a variety of individuals, and the data that's coming out of that is accurate and reliable. The research thrusts in our center are divided into these 3 main categories to fulfill this equation, and these research projects are distributed not only in the disciplines that contribute to them, but also geographically, as you saw in my first slide. It is very important for me to note, however, that our center, this ERC Center, Engineering Research Center, is quite unique from other standard research centers because they're driven by needs of a system. And these systems, such as the ones that are shown here, become the focal point of driving collaboration and teaming across the entire center. In our case, these systems are focused on healthcare, but these systems can also be connected to IoT or energy sectors. These systems also become enablers of new innovation and become vehicles through which industry partnerships can be grown and sustained. In our center, our use cases span the areas of asthma, cardiovascular health, prediabetes, and wound care. Such a center environment with systems-driven emphasis is really critical in us achieving success in systems for health management. Here is an example of one of our disruptive systems. This is a self-powered ECG shirt. This shirt operates without any batteries and only relies on body heat as its power source. The required breakthroughs that needed to happen for this shirt to be realized required a multidisciplinary team with lots of innovations coming out of this. For example, it required cutting-edge energy harvesters to harvest body heat in the form of thermoelectric devices. It requires textiles with smart and dry electrodes. It required flexible antenna devices, storage devices that are more efficient than batteries, and very low power electronics, whether it's the SoC or the radio. Here are some of the very flexible thermoelectric devices that we made using cutting edge materials such as liquid metals that lead to very conformal placement on skin with very high efficiency. Another example of our systems is on asthma management, and this system monitors in real time and in simultaneous situation both the environmental exposures of an individual as well as their health response. This particular platform can really lead us to understand the correlation between environment and health, and this system is also driving our clinical collaborators, as you can see in this picture, where these devices are being tested in clinical studies. Another system that's really coming along in the recent year is our Metabolic Tracker. This particular system, again, requires multidisciplines to come together, where we have an electrochemical patch that has multiple sensing modalities on there, including lactate, glucose, temperature, and pH. It also has newer versions of this electrochemical patch, also has an optical patch on the other side to really try to get a sophisticated understanding of what is happening with the human body. So with that in research background, I'd like to share a little bit about what our center has been able to accomplish. Our center is now over 8 years old. And as I said before, we have a multidisciplinary team. Together, our team has published over 600 publications. And just within the last year, members of our team gave over 40 invited talks. We have been recognized for numerous research awards and acknowledgements across globally. And you can see some examples on this slide. But I think one thing that would be interesting to share with you is to really assess quantitatively how a center can help in collaborating and bringing together different types of individuals. So here is a network map of just our publications. You can make lots of network maps of, let's say, proposal development or projects that you're working together, but this is just focused on publications. And you can see that in the very beginning of our center when we started, these are individual nodes of different PIs in the center, but as the center grew into year 1 and then year 2, and so on, you can see the networks and the connections that have formed between all of these different PIs. So this is a real testament for what a center can do to catalyze collaboration, which in turn catalyzes innovation. And here is the 5th year. Now we're in our year 8, so this is much more dense now, but this slide shows the 5th year network of all of our center PIs. Education is also a critical core area in our center as we're focused on generating the next set of leaders. We have numerous programs from K through 12 all the way through postdoc areas. Our minor program that began in the beginning was quite ECE-centric, but now has become quite multi-diverse. And here is an example on the bottom of our pipeline that we've created. We have these students who start off in K through 12, then become undergraduates, or they start off as undergraduates and become PhD students, or they start with PhD students and become faculty members, or they start as postdocs and become tenure track faculty members at other institutions. So we're very proud of the pipeline that a center like this can create. We also have numerous student successes across all of our campuses. You can see some examples here. We have graduated 75 PhD students in our center to date. They have gone into academia, industry, and also government positions. Industry is a huge part of what we do, and they're immensely important to us because we really want them to take our technologies and commercialize them. We want them to invest research dollars into additional, more forward-looking directions, and we want them to mentor our students and also provide employment for them. So in addition to recruiting existing industries as members of our center, we are also creating new spin-off companies on our own. We're very proud of that. So far, we've spun out over 10 companies, and the slide here shows the 7 currently active companies in the Assist ecosystem. We have filed over 62 inventions and have 26 patent applications. And as you already saw in the slide before, we have about 25 industry members currently part of the Assist Center. This is something that's a very important element for us. I'll give you a showcase of one of these companies. It's a DermaSense that is making microneedles for a variety of different applications from interstitial fluids. They're getting a lot of attention in terms of being able to monitor infection in real time in a non-invasive or minimally invasive manner. These individuals that you see down here were all initially part of the Assist team, and now some of them have spun out into this company and full-time working for the startup company. Here are some recent results from DermaSense showing that their efficacy of measurements of different biomarkers such as lactate and glucose is validated with gold standards. Since industry is a very important part of what we do and important for our commercialization aspects, we want to make sure that we are continuously providing value for industry. We give them a voice in terms of specific projects that they want to fund with their membership dollars. We have also worked with them to provide internships using NSF's intern program. We also have a rapid prototyping facility for industry that they can come in and quickly generate a prototype with combination of commercial and Assist technologies. All of this is an effort to increase collaborations and make industry a more close part of everything that we do going forward. Now, our technologies, which I talked very briefly about, really build or enable self-powered systems. So everything that we do is in that direction, and the use cases are really immense. So here's a figure from Eric Topol showing all the different organs and different health conditions that can be monitored and benefited by self-powered platforms or continuously monitoring platforms. We have addressed many of these in new proposal activities that have been, the teams have come out of the Assist collaboration, and we have been able to successfully get additional grant money from all of these different agencies that you see here in the area of health, kidney disease, aging, and even we have submitted many proposals in the area of COVID-19. So with that, I'd like to come to the summary of my overview and maybe take some of your questions during the Q&A. I hope that what I've shown you gives you an idea that Assist Center is a systems-driven center. We're building leading-edge systems that are use case-driven. These systems really drive collaborations not only within our team, but also with clinicians on human subject studies and coming up with new use cases with clinicians. We are achieving excellence in our state-of-the-art and convergent research. Our focus is really, number one focus is to build a pipeline of next generation of global leaders. We are integrating diversity in all aspects that we undertake. And with our startup companies and our licensees, we are stimulating the economy. And we also have already started executing our strategic plan for self-sufficiency after our NSF funding comes to an end. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Veena and Behnam. We have just a few minutes to take any questions that you all have. I did want to do a brief introduction quickly. Behnam is our distinguished professor of professor of textile materials in the Wilson College of Textiles at NC State, and is also a professor in the departments of chemical and biomolecular engineering and biomedical engineering. He also serves as associate dean in the Wilson College of Textiles and is the executive director of the Nonwovens Institute. Thank you, Behnam. Veena Misra is the director of the National Science Foundation's Nanosystems Engineering Research Center on Advanced Self-Powered of Integrated Sensors and Technologies, ASSIST for short. She is a distinguished professor of electrical and computer engineering at North Carolina State and a 2012 IEEE Fellow. She's also a distinguished lecturer for the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering. Thank you both for joining us today. We have just a couple minutes, like I said, for questions. I think to dive right in and help everyone out a little bit, for both of you, I wanted to ask, how would an emerging research park select a center focus, and how beneficial is it to have a dedicated space?
Well, maybe I can address that. You know, one of the things that I talked about in my presentation was the need for larger scale shared pilot facilities. So we currently have over 55 PhD students and a network of 30 faculty members. And essentially we've created these amazing test beds where all of our students who are working with us essentially use these shared facilities. And so I think dedicated space and these large facilities would essentially enable you to do the kinds of things that I talked about and go beyond where we are today and really directly connect with industry in terms of what they need and what they do, and we can then collaborate on doing things more than we have done in the past.
And Veena, we'd love to hear your take on that as well.
Yeah, I would echo what Behnam has said. I would say also looking at the local area and looking at what industry you have and building on the strength of the local industry and maybe local hospitals that might be available and be involved in research. Those are all very good opportunities.
Okay, thank you. I did want to touch upon one more question really quick here. Both of you mentioned kind of multidisciplinary projects across campus. Can you talk a little bit more about or explain if there were any difficulties with that, or how you went about garnering the support from across different areas on campus?
Sure, I can start with that one. I think in our case, it was engineering talking to the clinical scientists and understanding each other's language. And that was a little bumpy in the beginning. So we started to create training modules so that our engineering students would understand more about what was involved. And that was very helpful. Also, we had some mind mapping activities for individuals involved in the research to understand the system level requirements and what use cases they would enable, and that was then trickled down to the different disciplines. So there are definitely challenges when different disciplines come together, but there are good ideas out there to try to reduce those barriers as much as possible.
I think I would say that we've done essentially the same. We've also held a lot of workshops where the community has come together and talked about challenges, opportunities, and how we can bridge the gaps to achieve the goals that we had set out to solve. And so I think it takes a lot of dialogue, it takes a lot of work, but I think it's been quite rewarding because we get a lot of participation from a lot of good colleagues.
Thank you. So we are out of time, unfortunately, here. A ton of great information. I encourage all of you, if there's additional questions, to connect with Veena and Behnam offline. They would be happy to answer any additional questions and talk models and things like that. One thing that I wanted to add is for everyone to make sure you join the roundtable discussions that will be a part of the closing session. I believe everyone should have been assigned to a specific group. We will discuss the predictions of the new normal, what we're in right now, and we'll report those comments out to the larger group. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.